So there was a recommendation that that must be investigated. And the individuals who shot, if they could be found, should also be investigated and should be charged. But that's really all, yeah. There's very little on how unions operate or should operate or whatever in the Commission's findings. Steve, on the issue of the terms of reference, I think what's quite interesting in Canada, there's been a lot of concern because the cabinet there also appoint commissions of inquiry and judicial commissions of inquiry. And just to tell people that the commission of inquiry model is mainly used in Commonwealth countries. It's not common in the United States and the Scandinavian countries or elsewhere in Africa and so on. It is very much a Commonwealth model. And it has this big problem, which is that the president appoints it, the prime minister appoints it, or the cabinet appoints it. And in Canada, there's been a lot of discussion about how do we ensure that commissions of inquiry are truly independent, because that's their greatest value, is that they're independent. And there's been some debate about whether you shouldn't have a kind of body, an institution that looks at whether a commission should be set up or not, what the terms of reference should be, and that should be canvassed with the public, with government, and it should be broadly canvassed. It should appoint the commissioners, it should appoint the staff, it should then make recommendations to government on its findings, and then only then it should be decided what the terms of reference are and if the commission should happen at all. I think South Africa needs to have that debate if we're really going to give some kind of... There are so many commissions of inquiries in South Africa that just have simply been profoundly interfered with because of this presidential privilege. And of course, commissions of inquiry are set up in the Constitution, and it's the president that has to actually appoint them. So it's also a constitutional issue, in fact. There was discussion in the beginning about whether there should be a parallel process. And I think what happened was a feeling that there wasn't the person power to run that. There weren't sufficient people who were engaging in the campaign. And so the kind of compromise was there would be a watching brief. So you would have people like CALs who would come and who would watch over the whole process as it was happening, but actually participate in the commission as lawyers. You would have an NGO that was going to represent the Constitution and see that the Constitution was properly followed in the Commission's hearings. And I think CASAC is still have been quite voluble about what they thought about the report. And that there would be the Justice for Marikana campaign, which would, they were all important interventions. But I do think that although I said the media did cover the commission, it covered the commission fairly weakly. And part of the problem was that the Oscar Pistorius trial was happening simultaneously, and that just took over the media, basically. And I think that the media can play a very important role in being, if you like, that kind of extra public eye on the commission. But I think we have to look to the fact that civil society in South Africa is weak at the moment. People are not absolutely scandalized by these things. South Africans were shocked to the core by Marikana, but they didn't all rush to act on it. They didn't all, get into campaigns locally in Rustenburg, whatever. There were people who were very active. But I thought civil society was quite a weak response in many ways. Sorry, what was your next question? I thought that Jackie's comment, parallel inquiries is very, very interesting. And I think that, we can definitely take a leaf from that book, that one needs to look at the possibility of these independent inquiries. But it does, of course, depend on who in the area is if there's any civil society strength in that area. if there are voices in that area. Well, Gavin, yeah. Oh, yeah. The reconciliation. You know, I mean, I agree with you completely about the motto. I'm just trying to think. The motto of the commission was truth, restoration, and justice. It wasn't just truth. It was about justice and restoration. And I think you're right, that it wasn't achieved. And it was particularly illustrated around the families of the deceased. But I think there was an unexpected outcome from that. Just to quickly tell people, you know, on the first day when people were told to stand up while the roll of the dead was called out, people stood up and there was suddenly, none of the families are here. So then the families had to be contacted and a provision had to be made for them, and they came to the commission. Then the commission continues with its procedure. It starts showing these shocking images of workers being blasted apart in front of the families. The families, some had to be hospitalized. It was just an absolute disaster. Then the commission says, no, now we have to give warnings in advance. So at each stage, the commission is called to account on their inhumanity. Then you get to the point where the lawyers say, particularly EFF lawyers, we haven't got any money left. Why should the police have all this money, you know, from government in order to represent themselves at the commission? But there are other people who can't represent themselves at the commission because they don't have the money. And so there must be some kind of justice and representation here. And so you then have a court case happening where it's taken to the High Court rules, yes, in fact, the families of the deceased arrested and injured, should in fact have some kind of legal representation from the state that's paid for. And so I think very important precedents were set through the commission. So for future commissions, I mean sadly not for this commission, but for future commissions. In fact, this whole issue of whether legal aid should pay for people at commissions and inquiries has now gone to the Constitutional Court, and there's still going to be a hearing around that. But even the police, one of the police lawyers said to me, it was completely wrong that there wasn't equality of representation. So hopefully something will come out of that. The other thing that came out of it was just the extraordinary change in the widows themselves. They came as these timid, divided, not knowing what was going on, group of people to actually be able to talk to 15,000 people at a Marikana commemoration, to take up a range of issues like the fact that some of the people who had died, who had been killed, were actually contracted workers and they weren't employed directly by Lonmin. And so when Lonmin paid out for funerals and paid out compensation, you know, that was rightfully due to them on Provident Fund and those sorts of things, and also employed people, gave people jobs, deceased widows of the deceased jobs. These widows came up and said, no, but you've also got to give it to the contracted ladies. They've also got to have the right. These women have also suffered, and they've also got to have jobs, they've got to have compensation and so on. So it was a whole kind of education process that these women went through. It's just quite extraordinary talking to them at the end, just simply how militant they are, and how political they are actually. Yeah, what was the other?
Yeah, I think we've covered it.
Yeah.
Colleagues, we have literally run out of time, but because we started late, I'm going to allow one final round of 3 people. There, the hands are there. 1, 2, 3. So I'll start with you, sir. And then just your name quickly and straight, because we've run out of time.
Okay, my name is Joseph Nakobe from Bua Mining Communities in Rustenburg. Thanks, Doctor, about the presentation. I think what you highlight in the presentation is that the problems that were highlighted with the Marikana Commission actually did not begin there, and in actual fact will not end. You know, and I really have a challenge. Young as I appear or as I am actually frustrated and worried about us talking. You know, you highlighted the issues of SLPs. Actually, even PALs here have got a difficulty of even accessing those documents from the mining companies. You know, you can imagine what struggles is the community facing on the ground. And speaking about the miners in Marikana, and you just touched on subcontract workers, you know, who actually are causing unintended consequences of, you know, causing a burden to public facilities, you know, your health, transportation, schools, and so forth. And that's why our motto as Brewer mining communities is every mine is a community cost, because it is the community ultimately which must take up the cost. Either they have to suffer, or they have to come up more as taxpayers, or by any other means, you know, either suffer death or any type of that thing. So I would like to urge this meeting, you know, I understand it's most academics here, but why can't we think of having something that extends what wasn't touched on by the Commission? Because it means we enjoy this slogan of Habitat Continue.
Thank you.
My point is finished.
Thank you, sir. Then I'll have the last speaker.
My name is Daniel Winkler. I'm an associate for the Centre for Sustainability in Mining and Industry here at WITS. And I think the point that I want to make ties in quite nicely with what the previous speaker said. When I look at this, it strikes me very much as an analogue to the genocide in Rwanda. A lot of people spent a lot of time talking about the political interactions and dynamics that led to that genocide. And yet they managed to avoid the elephant in the room, which was the fact that you have a peasant-based agricultural system which can only support a certain number of people on a certain area of productive land. And once you exceed that, you end up with an ecological collapse, which then precipitates all sorts of political conflict. And I think what we have in Marikana is the first signs of the fact that we have essentially a colonial structure of our mining industry, which is premised on low productivity, high employment of low-cost workers, and worker aspiration, which is far more along the Australian model, where the people are starting to rightfully demand a living wage and a decent level of employment, which cannot be achieved with the structure of the industry as it is. If our platinum sector and much of our gold sector was in Australia, it would be closed down because it would be unprofitable. We wouldn't be able to run it. And it strikes me that this conversation isn't being held. It's not getting enough, it's not being ventilated appropriately. We really have to look at our mining industry and decide what we want it to be. Do we want it to be a mass employer at very low levels, possibly just above the poverty level, until we exhaust those ore bodies, or do we want to really have a close look at it and decide that we want to have good quality of employment but for far fewer people? And this is a very tricky political question to answer, and I think it has to be debated at the highest levels in our society and by far more people than are currently engaged with it.
Thank you. Carly, you'd like to throw some comments, although some of the questions are bigger than this room.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Joseph, yeah. You know, I think you were right when you said it didn't begin at the Marikana events, and it didn't end with those events, and it didn't end with the commission. I think that's a really insightful statement, because often commissions are really only the very beginning of an investigation. They uncover some truths, but they certainly don't uncover all of the truths. And very often the digging has to go on for a long time afterwards. And you know, in that Bloody Sunday thing, the digging went on for 20 years afterwards. Until a different kind of truth emerged. And I think that's going to happen with the Marikana Commission as well. You're going to have people who continuously go back and look and ask questions. And at the moment, the whole issue is so highly politicized that nobody wants to break ranks, nobody wants to find that they're suspended or dismissed or they're not promoted or whatever. So people don't want to talk. But at a later date, when those sort of things are not so important, I think you'll start getting people talking again, in the police, in Lonmin, and so on. And so you'll start getting a different kind of truth coming forward. And so the process continues. I think that commissions only often just start the process of digging. And there are, I know, certain people who are very committed to seeing this whole process continue. Journalists and people in the Justice for Marikana campaign and so on, who intend to go on asking those questions and keeping in touch with the families and the arrested and injured, to go on digging to find that. Your other comment was, it's not enough really to just get at the truth, that Lonmin has a huge responsibility. It has a responsibility for those mining communities around, for the conditions of the mine workers, for their wages and so on. And I think that's absolutely true. And to be honest, although I said I thought there were some good recommendations that came out around Lonmin and it's observing its social labour plan, I think Lonmin got away with murder at the Marikana Commission. He was very happy to sit back and hear the endless interrogation of the police, because it watched the time ticking over. And it really, in the end, it was in the box for, I think it was about 2 weeks. And so a whole range of questions that should have been asked of it just never were, because the commission ended. There was some very valuable information that came out in the end around transfer pricing, around the fact that Lonmin had paid in that period where those demands were being made, $670 million to its Impala BEE partner. It had paid out to its shareholders, but it said, no, we actually couldn't afford, after 2008, we couldn't afford to build these houses and meet our obligations around the SLP, because there was this financial collapse globally and so on. But in fact, it was paying out people a lot of money. It was also transferring 500 million rand a year to Bermuda and so on. So, I think that it would be good to have a much, as you were suggesting, a further investigation into actually Lonmin's obligations and responsibilities in relation to Marikana and the mining communities.
Yeah. Thank you, Carly. Anything else?
I don't know. I think that was it?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, Daniel's comment. Wow, that's a big one, Daniel. I mean, there are obviously these forums that are going on at the moment, the mining forum, where the unions involved and the president and the DMR and the DL and so on, and there's discussions at NEDLAC and so on. I mean, the narrative of government is really mining must stay. Mining is here to stay because it's a big job creator. But I do think that's often a myth. I mean, we were talking recently, Jackie and I, about the fact that in coal mining, it's punted, we must have these coal mines across the country because it's a big job creator. In fact, it's not a big job creator at all. So I think we need to start interrogating these myths and interrogate also whether mining is the way to go in South Africa. Whether there shouldn't be an emphasis elsewhere, and whether it isn't destroying the environment and destroying food supplies and destroying people's livelihoods. And of course, those are huge questions that still have to be interrogated, and which government is very reluctant to interrogate, because the National Development Plan says mining is the way to go. That is the route we have to go. But that is another seminar, I think.
Indeed. Wow, thank you, Carly. Let's give just two quick announcements. We are going to have another seminar on the 18th next week on the MPRDA. So please, comrades, you are urged to come again and support, and it is going to be as interesting as this one. And secondly, as we go out, Monty has already signaled, there's breakfast waiting for us outside, and do enjoy. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the comments. Okay, hang on. Make sure that you sign the register if you did not. Maybe you arrived late. Thank you very much for coming. I think we started. So we made up for
Hello. Thank you.
I wanted to, on a personal level,
I wrote something on the recommendation.
Of course, the topic